Before we dive into tonight's tale, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you want more creepy stories that will keep you up at night. Some crimes leave behind bloodstains, broken locks, or desperate final messages scrawled on the walls. Others don't leave anything at all. The Gaslight killer case was one of those. 7 people, gone without a trace over 5 years. No bodies, no signs of a struggle. Just security footage of them going about their business at a 24-hour gas station on the outskirts of Salem. They filled up their tanks, grabbed snacks, bought lottery tickets. Normal. Routine. Then they disappeared. Their cars turned up days later, scattered across town, empty, undamaged, sometimes with the keys still in the ignition, the engines idling like someone had just stepped away. But no one ever came back. The police worked the case hard. They pulled hours of surveillance footage, interviewed every gas station employee, tracked down the clerks who had been on shift each night. They even shut the place down temporarily after the 4th disappearance, hoping time would reveal something they'd missed. Nothing. No suspects, no evidence. The only thread connecting the victims, every single one had bought a lottery ticket. Then in 1993, the disappearances stopped. No warning, no arrests. The gas station changed hands, rebranded, and life in Salem moved on like it always did. But people talked. Locals warned each other about that station, even after it reopened under a new name. Something wasn't right about it. Some customers said they walked inside and felt like they lost time, like they blinked and suddenly 10 minutes were gone. Others swore they caught glimpses of someone standing outside, just beyond the glow of the neon sign, watching but never coming in. Most people ignored the stories. I couldn't. That's why I took the job. Not for the paycheck. I had no intention of working the night shift long term. I was here for answers. I run a true crime podcast, digging into unsolved mysteries and the kind of cases that leave more questions than conclusions. I'd covered the Gaslight killer before, but the details never sat right with me. The disappearances were too clean, too precise. The connections, those damn lottery tickets, felt too deliberate to be coincidence. So I applied, got the job, started my first shift. I thought I was here to uncover the truth about a serial killer. I was wrong. The first thing I noticed about Jim was how tired he looked. Not the kind of tired that comes from lack of sleep, the kind that settles deep in your bones, like he'd been carrying something too heavy for too long. His uniform shirt was faded, his hands stained with years of nicotine, and his eyes carried the dull look of someone who had seen things he'd rather forget. He barely looked at me as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, battered notebook. The edges were curled, the cover stained with something dark, maybe old coffee, maybe something else. He pressed it into my hand without a word. "These are the rules," he muttered. "Follow them, and you'll make it through the night." Before I could respond, he turned toward the door. "That's it?" I asked, flipping open the notebook. The pages were filled with uneven handwriting, some words underlined, others scratched out and rewritten. No training? No walkthrough? Just this? Jim sighed, finally looking at me. "You think it's a joke?" I didn't answer, but I guess my face said enough. He exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. "They all do," he muttered. "At first." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Listen to me. People think a serial killer was behind those disappearances. That's not what happened." The air between us felt heavier. "This place," he hesitated. "It doesn't work like anywhere else." I stared at him, waiting for an explanation, but he just shook his head and turned away. "You'll understand soon." Then he walked out, leaving me standing alone in the dim glow of the flickering overhead lights. I looked down at the notebook and started reading. The rules: Rule 1, never allow customers to pump gas at pump 7. Rule 2, if a black cat enters the store, lock the bathroom door immediately. Rule 3, the lottery machine will print tickets by itself, burn them without reading. Rule 4, don't acknowledge customers wearing red raincoats, even if they speak to you. Rule 5, if you hear children laughing after midnight, play only Christian radio stations. Rule 6, the security mirror must be covered with a black cloth between 12 a.m. and 5 a.m. I read the list twice, then a third time. At first glance, it seemed like the paranoid ramblings of someone who had spent too many lonely nights in a convenience store, letting his imagination run wild. But something about it, a about the way the words were written, the desperate scratch of the ink, the parts that had been rewritten multiple times, unsettled me. I snapped the notebook shut and exhaled, shaking off the unease creeping up my spine. It was just a list. I told myself that. I told myself I wouldn't need it. But I kept it in my pocket anyway. The store was dead silent when it happened. It was 2:13 a.m., and I was halfway through a stale gas station burrito, trying to keep myself awake, when the sound cut through the quiet, a mechanical whirring from the lottery machine near the register. I hadn't touched it. No one was in the store. The machine beeped once and spat out a single ticket. A chill crawled up my spine. I wiped my hands on my jeans and hesitated before picking it up. The paper was warm, fresh from the printer. The numbers weren't random. They were dates. I stared at them, my stomach sinking. The dates felt familiar, like something I'd seen before, but couldn't immediately place. Then it clicked. I dropped the ticket like it had burned me. Each date matched a night someone had gone missing from this gas station. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the police reports I'd saved. 7 missing persons, 7 unexplained disappearances, 7 dates. It wasn't a coincidence. Every missing person had bought a ticket, whether they meant to or not. My hands felt clammy as I picked up the ticket again. This one had a new date printed on it, a date that hadn't happened yet. I didn't want to know who it belonged to. I didn't want to know if it was mine. The notebook's words rang in my head, burn them without reading. Too late for that now. I grabbed the lighter from behind the counter, flicked it on, and held the flame to the edge of the ticket. The paper curled, blackened, and disintegrated into ash. The second it was gone, the store felt normal again. The air lost that charged, static feeling. Nothing happened. I stood there for a long time, waiting for something, anything to change. Maybe I'd stopped a disappearance, or maybe I'd just broken the timeline. Jim told me to cover the security mirror at midnight. Just do it, he'd said, his voice flat. No questions. I should have listened. That night, the shift had been slow. Just a couple of truckers passing through and a guy who bought a pack of smokes and scratched his lottery ticket right there at the counter. Nothing weird. No flickering lights, no strange customers. It felt normal. Midnight came and went. The black cloth Jim left sat folded under the register. I told myself I'd cover the mirror soon, once I finished restocking the chips. But when I glanced up, something caught my eye. The reflection wasn't right. The shelves looked different, restocked with products we didn't have yet. The coffee station had a cup tipped over, the dark stain spreading across the counter. That hadn't happened. Not yet. My stomach twisted. I turned around to check. Everything was exactly how I'd left it. The shelves were half empty. The coffee cup was still upright. I swallowed hard and looked back at the mirror. There was someone behind the counter. A man, wearing a red raincoat. I spun around so fast I nearly knocked over the register. There was no one there. The store was empty. A cold sweat prickled at the back of my neck. I turned back to the mirror. He was closer now. I could see his face this time. Except, he didn't have one. Just smooth, blank skin where his features should have been. I lunged for the black cloth and threw it over the mirror without thinking. My hands were shaking as I tucked the edges in, covering every inch. The store was silent. No footsteps. No breathing. Just the hum of the refrigerator units in the background. I didn't check the mirror again after that. Not until the next night, when I came in for my shift and found the black cloth neatly folded on the counter. It was nearly 3 a.m. when I heard the soft tap, tap, tap of claws against the tile floor. I looked up from my phone, expecting a rat or maybe one of those oversized beetles that sometimes found their way in from the parking lot. Instead, a black cat slinked out from behind the shelves, its yellow eyes glowing under the fluorescent lights. I didn't remember seeing it come in. It moved with purpose, tail flicking as it weaved through the aisles, heading straight for me. "Where the hell did you come from?" I muttered, stepping around the counter. The cat stopped at my feet and opened its mouth, not to meow, but to drop something small and metallic onto the floor. A locket, old, rusted, and tarnished with age. I hesitated, then crouched down and picked it up. The metal was ice cold. I pried it open with my thumb, and my stomach twisted when I saw the faded photo inside. Carly Bishop. I knew her face well. She was the 5th victim of the Gaslight killer. vanished in 1991 after stopping for gas. Her car had been found 3 days later, empty, parked behind a church 2 towns over. No prints, no signs of a struggle. Just gone. I looked down at the cat. It blinked up at me, its tail curling neatly around its paws, like it was waiting. I reached out to touch it, but the cat bolted, darting past my legs, straight toward the bathroom. The second it crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut. Hard. I jumped back, nearly dropping the locket. My pulse pounded in my ears as I stared at the door. I hadn't heard the latch click, but I knew better than to check. Rule 2. If a black cat enters the store, lock the bathroom door immediately. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for the keys. I slid one into the lock and twisted until I heard the deadbolt engage. The store went eerily silent. I backed away, gripping the locket so tight my fingers ached. The cat never made another sound. No scratching, no meowing, nothing. The next morning when my shift ended, I unlocked the door. The bathroom was empty. The only sign anything had ever been there was a single black cat hair on the sink. And the locket? It was gone. I didn't sleep when I got home. Not after the cat. Not after what it left behind. That rusted locket was still in my pocket. Carly Bishop. 5th victim. The thought gnawed at me, but no matter how much I turned it over in my mind, there were no answers, just more questions. By the time I clocked in for my next shift, exhaustion had settled deep in my bones. The gas station felt different tonight. Not just eerie, expectant, like something was waiting. That was when I noticed her. Standing outside by the window. She'd been there before. I just hadn't paid much attention, not until now. A woman in a red raincoat. She never came inside, never knocked. Just stood near the coffee machines, her pale face barely visible under the hood. Her lips moved, whispering words I couldn't hear. I rubbed at my tired eyes and checked the clock. Nearly 2 a.m. Had she been standing there this whole time? I shivered and forced myself to focus. Restocked the shelves. Wiped down the counter. Ignore her. That was the rule, wasn't it? Rule 4. Don't acknowledge customers wearing red raincoats, even if they speak to you. I had followed every rule so far, but tonight, exhaustion made me reckless. Without thinking, I took a step toward the door. "Ma'am, do you need?" She moved. Not a step, not a shift. She jumped, 1 second by the window, the next with her palm pressed flat against the glass. I froze. There, smeared in thick, red ink across her pale skin, were 3 words: "Do not speak." My mouth snapped shut. Her fingers twitched slightly, like she was relieved. Then, slowly, she pulled her hand away and disappeared into the night. I stood there, breath shaking, until the automatic doors slid open behind me. A gust of cold air rushed in. I turned back to the register, pretending I hadn't seen the wet red stain she left behind on the glass. I should have gone home after the woman in the red raincoat, called in sick, found another job, but some part of me, some stubborn, stupid part, wanted to understand. So I stayed. The rest of my shift was uneventful. No whispering figures in the mirror, no stray cats carrying lost relics. By the time the sky turned gray with early morning light, I almost convinced myself that maybe it had been a fluke. A bad night. I was wrong. The next night, the gas station felt off again. The air heavier, the hum of the refrigerator somehow louder. But I pushed through it, serving customers like nothing was wrong. Then the register rang up a total of $19.93. I barely noticed at first, until the overhead lights flickered. The bulbs buzzed, dimming for just a second before flaring back to life. Weird. I took the guy's 20, handed him his change, and watched him walk out the door like nothing happened. Maybe it was nothing, but then it happened again. A woman bought a pack of cigarettes and a soda, $19.93. The second the register displayed that number, the touchscreen glitched, freezing before suddenly rebooting itself. I forced a laugh. "Sorry, this thing's a piece of crap." She barely noticed, just took her change and left. I told myself it was a coincidence. Until the third time. A man in a business suit. Coffee, beef jerky, and a newspaper. 1993. And this time, everything died. The power cut out completely. The coolers shut off, the radio let out a static-laced screech, and the entire store was plunged into darkness. The customer swore under his breath. "Geez, what the hell?" I grabbed my phone, fumbling to turn on the flashlight. "Sorry, we've been having issues." The emergency lights kicked in, casting long, sickly yellow shadows. But the moment the dim glow returned, my breath caught in my throat. There was someone else in the store. Not the businessman. Not a regular customer. A figure stood at the back of the aisle, just past the coolers, not moving, not browsing, just watching. A man. His face was obscured, body draped in something dark and heavy. My gut twisted with recognition, like I'd seen him before. Then, as suddenly as the power had gone out, the store roared back to life. Lights, refrigerators, radio, everything was back to normal, except for the fact that the man was gone. The businessman let out a nervous chuckle, grabbing his bag off the counter. Guess the grid's acting up. Anyway, have a good night. He left. I stayed frozen behind the register, staring at the spot where the figure had been. I knew what I saw, and I knew what number had triggered it. 1993, the year the disappearances stopped. Every time the register hit that total, reality shifted, and something looked back. I wanted to believe there was a pattern I could break, a mistake in history that I could expose, some human logic behind the disappearances, something I could stop. But the more nights I spent here, the more I realized the truth was far worse. This wasn't about a killer lurking in the shadows. There was no deranged man snatching people off the lot. No psychopath leaving clues in the form of cursed lottery tickets. The Gaslight killer wasn't human. And neither were the rules. The night after the $19.93 incident, I did what I always did. I showed up for my shift. Pretended nothing was wrong. Pretended I wasn't starting to piece together the bigger picture. The rules weren't protecting people. They were preserving the disappearances. Every instruction, every strange, arbitrary rule wasn't about keeping employees safe. It was about making sure the cycle continued. Pump number 7 never worked because no one was supposed to stop there in the first place. The lottery tickets printed on their own because they were marking the next victim. The security mirror didn't reflect reality. It showed what had to happen. And the woman in the red raincoat, she wasn't trying to hurt me. She was trying to warn me. I didn't have long to dwell on that realization, because at exactly 2:13 a.m., the lottery machine came to life again. The sound of paper feeding through the rollers, the soft snick as the ticket landed in the tray. I already knew what it would say. Still, my hands shook as I reached for it. This time, the numbers weren't just dates. There was something else printed at the bottom, a timestamp. 4:37 a.m., and a name, mine. My stomach twisted. I could still burn it. That worked before, right? But even as the thought crossed my mind, a flicker of movement caught my eye. The security mirror. It was still covered, but the cloth had started to slip, revealing just a sliver of glass, enough to see the reflection of the front door, enough to see him, a man, standing outside, staring in. I knew that shape. I had seen him before. The moment the power went out, the glass door rattled, the handle turned. 4:37 a.m. was coming, and I was next. I knew I was next. It was obvious now. This place wasn't a crime scene. It was a machine, a system designed to make people disappear. The rules weren't about protection. They were about keeping the cycle intact. And I had already stepped too far into it. The lottery tickets, the mirror, the red raincoat, the total of $19.93. They weren't just random incidents. They were gears turning, pulling people into whatever void had swallowed 7 others before me. But if this place followed a pattern, then patterns could be broken. I needed to disrupt the cycle. I didn't have time to overthink it. If I sat still, I'd vanish like the rest. So I grabbed everything I could, candy bars, cigarettes, a pack of lighters, a bottle of windshield fluid, and started ringing myself up the register. 1993, says the lights flickered. I voided the transaction and did it again. 1993. The radio cut to static. Again. 1993. The register stuttered, glitched, then reset itself. I didn't stop. I kept doing it over and over, pushing the total to that cursed number, forcing the cycle to fold in on itself. The gas station groaned, the walls seeming to breathe, stretching and shrinking like something was trying to push through from the other side. Then the lottery machine screamed, a high, piercing wail like metal grinding against bone. Tickets spewed out in a violent storm, covering the counter, spilling onto the floor. They were all the same, every single one printed with a date. Today's date, my name. The security mirror rattled violently, the black cloth slipping away. I forced myself to look. The door was gone. Not open, not broken, just gone. Through the mirror, I could still see the parking lot outside, the road stretching beyond the station. But when I turned to look directly, nothing. just endless darkness. And then a shadow moved behind me. I turned too late. The mirror shattered. A force hit me hard, knocking me off my feet. The impact sent me sprawling, my head cracking against the counter. My vision swam, the flickering lights stuttering in and out of existence. The walls trembled, the tickets burned, the floor beneath me tilted like the entire building was being swallowed. And then silence. No buzzing lights, no screaming machine, no shifting walls. I pulled myself up, heart pounding. The gas station was gone. I wasn't inside anymore. I was standing in the middle of an empty lot. The pavement was cracked, overgrown with weeds. No pumps, no building, no sign it had ever existed. Just me, alone. I turned in slow circles, my breath sharp and unsteady. The road was still there, stretching into the distance. The streetlights still glowed, but the gas station, the one that had stolen 7 people before me, was gone. Like it had never been there in the first place. Like it had only ever existed because it needed to. And now, the cycle was broken. I didn't know if I had escaped, or if I had simply erased myself along with it. But I did know one thing. There would be no more disappearances. Not from here. Not anymore. I made it out. At least I think I did. I told my story, recorded everything, uploaded it to my podcast. People ate it up. Downloads spiked. Comments flooded in. The Gaslight killer case had been a mystery for decades, and now I had given it an ending. Or so I thought. Then the emails started. Not just the usual messages from true crime fanatics or armchair detectives. These were different. Some listeners claimed they heard exactly what happened to me. Every detail, word for word. Others, they swore I described something completely different. A different gas station, a different town, a different year. At first, I chalked it up to misremembering. People think they hear things that aren't there all the time. But then I checked my own recordings. Every version was different. I had proof, clips from listeners, timestamps that didn't match my original upload, my voice telling versions of the story I never recorded. Some episodes ended with me escaping. Others didn't. And then came the real problem. People went looking for the gas station. They searched old maps, compared photos, traced every lead I'd mentioned, but they never found it. There was nothing there. No records, no property sales, not even an empty lot where it should have been. Because it wasn't real anymore. It was gone, like it had never existed. And yet, on stormy nights, truckers still call into my show, swearing they saw something on an empty road, a flickering neon sign, a sign that wasn't there before, a sign that shouldn't be there at all. And sometimes, I think about stopping to check, just to see if it's waiting for me. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more creepy stories. Stay safe, and see you in the next nightmare.